So hello and welcome back to the Journey Beyond Yourself Summit. We have an absolute gift today. We have with us Tomas Bjorkman. Welcome, Tomas.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your summit.
Wonderful for you to be here. Tomas, I'm going to introduce you and then we will get stuck in. I know there's so much we could talk about, so I want to get into it. But Tomas, you have had a long career, beginning as an entrepreneur in a variety of businesses within financial services, initially working all over Europe. And in 2008, you established the Iskeret Foundation in Stockholm. I know
yes,
that
the Iskeret Foundation in Stockholm, which means the Oak Island Foundation.
Awesome. I remembered the Oak Island part, but I love the whole concept. This is a foundation that's established a conference facility on its island in the Stockholm archipelago. So the mission of the foundation is to facilitate personal development and social change with the aim of helping create a more conscious society. So a special focus of the foundation is supporting the development of social entrepreneurs, because you were one, you are one, you have a lot of experience there, and the understanding of the complexities of social change. The foundation also operates a co-working space in central Stockholm with the aim of bringing organizations together, again, working towards a more conscious society. Now, Tomas, your credentials are amazing. You're a member of the Club of Rome, a fellow of the Royal Swedish Academy of Engineering Science, and a fellow of the World Academy of Arts and Science. Among your initiatives are the Perspectiva Institute in London, the Co-Creation Loft in Berlin, the Emerge Media Initiative, and the Digital Platform for Personal Growth, 29k.org. And as if that is not enough, in your spare time...
I wonder where you found this CV. This is a bit too long as a presentation.
I mean, this is short compared to what you've done. And in your spare time, you've managed to publish 3 books: The Market Myth, The Nordic Secret, and in 2019, The World We Create. So you are a busy man, and I love your presentation, which I know The Nordic Secret is a TED Talk, and it's fascinating because you talk about how personal transformation, personal development, increasing our consciousness is not just essential for ourselves as individuals, but it's actually essential for the wider society and community. And you even have a case study of a whole country. So do you want to give us...
3 countries, actually.
3 countries. So can you, it's a hard feat, can you give us a synopsis of the Nordic, what is the Nordic Secret?
Okay. So I'll start by zooming out a little bit. So after selling my banking business in 2006, I had the opportunity to reflect on what to do with the second half of my life. I was just about to turn 50 then. And I decided that I really, based on my experience within business, to focus on this very important inner aspect of our lives, the inner maturation journey that we all are during our lifetimes. And that I saw in business is so crucial for both top management, but or perhaps especially for top management, but really anyone in an organization that has to try to come to grips with the increasingly rapidly moving and more complex business environment. The best thing you can do is to help those persons and help yourself to grow in your inner maturity. And that is what we sometimes call personal development, and some talk about spiritual growth, and there are many names for this. So I've been doing that within my foundation for a bit more than 10 years. But I was especially interested in the combination or the relationship between this inner growth and our capacity to to function in more and more complex organizations. And back then it was business organizations. But then, of course, the question came up, if we in business know, and we have consultants and HR people who can actually help us in this developmental journey, support us in our inner growth journey, how come that we are not at all talking about this importance in society? In society, we're talking about the importance of lifelong learning, but lifelong inner development to be able to manage our more and more complex lives, we don't speak about.
Yeah.
Or not so much yet, not in the official discourse anyhow, not in politics. And then, of course, if we see this connection in business between our inner ability to handle complexity, both emotionally and cognitively, how come that we are not at all talking about that in society?
Yeah.
And especially since I believe, like many now do, that all our societies, our global society and our national societies, are somehow in a deep transformation. And in these times of deep transformation, it is just so important that we all as individuals have the inner resources and capacities, not just to manage our own lives, but to become active co-creators of the new world that wants to emerge.
Yes.
And that takes us to the Nordic secret, because after doing this within my foundation for about 5 years or something like that, I realized, together with my friend and colleague Lena Andersen, who is a Danish philosopher and writer, who I should also say did the most work in writing the book The Nordic Secret. We together found out that this focus on the connection between our inner personal developmental journeys and societal change, that was actually the normal way to see the world for intellectuals and politicians in all the Scandinavian countries 100 or 150 years ago. And we got this from the German idealist philosophers who wrote in the beginning of the 1800s. And they, of course, and they were people like Schiller, Goethe, Herder, von Humboldt, Hegel. And they all reacted against the Enlightenment philosophers' view of our mind as a rational machine that is somehow fully developed in our early 20s, and then it's just sort of to keep that machinery going for the rest of your life, and eventually it will get rusty and break down. They said, no, that is a completely misconception of our intellect, our mind. Our mind is actually a complex organic system under lifelong development, and that developmental journey can be supported. And they gave this developmental possibility the German name of Bildung. And the amazing thing is that back then, more than 100 years ago in Scandinavia, this was the general worldview, that we are on this amazing lifelong inner journey, and that this journey can be supported, and that this development is not only important for the individuals, but also for society. So at the end of the 1800s, and you should remember that back then, all the Scandinavian countries were the poorest countries in Europe. We were non-democratic, authoritarian, agricultural countries. And then just a few generations later, even before the Second World War, we were at the top of the richest, the happiest, the most stable industrial democracies in the world. And we point out, Lena and I, in the book, that one reason, and perhaps we argue the most important reason for being able to make that journey, was the fact that we had this amazing leading intellectuals and politicians who wanted to support this developmental journey in as many people as possible in Scandinavia. And do you know how they did that?
Well, they did what I would love every country in the world to do now. They started retreat centers and they encouraged participants. And I think I've heard you say at some stage up to 10% of the populace went to these retreat centers, which were for up to 6 months. They were encouraged to go and work on their inner selves. I am prepared, Tomas.
Yes, you have read the book. That's great. No, that's actually true. I mean, so at the end of the 1800s, or at the turn of the century, year 1900, there were 100 centers like this established just in Denmark, 75 in Norway, and 150 in Sweden, where, just as you say, young adults in their 20s, later on with full state subsidy, could spend 6 months in retreat, not only working on themselves, but also learning things, learning useful things for this societal transition. But a key and expressed aim of these programs was to help these young adults to take this very important developmental step that researchers in adult development today has confirmed that we all as humans can take this step, but quite not a majority of people today in the West ever takes this step. And this is the important step of shifting your, what some call your locus of control, from being outer-directed. As a young adult, you are and you should be dependent on your culture and on your peer group and on your leaders to take directions for both your values and your narratives and how to see the world and all of that. But then at one stage in life, which could be earlier, which could be later, and for some people never happens, you somehow become able to connect with your inner source of values and control, and you become inner directed. And in the language of Professor Robert Keegan, you go from a socialized mind into becoming self-authoring. And this was the insight by these German philosophers. And they were using almost the same language, saying that in order for democracy to work, you need to have a critical mass of people, not just looking what everyone else is doing. Not looking for an authoritarian leader or a dogmatic religion to tell you what to do, but actually reach that state of inner maturity where you can find that guidance within yourself. And Schiller wrote explicitly that the reason, and he lived through the French Revolution, and that he and many others, of course, in Europe, put a great hope in the French Revolution that finally the French people will get rid of this sort of authoritarian king and will develop democracy. But then, of course, that is not what happened. So everyone started to be looking for this external authority. And first they found Robespierre and then later Napoleon. And of course, there were no democracy back then. And Schiller pointed out that the main reason for that was that there was not a critical mass of self-authoring individuals in society. So that is what these politicians wanted to achieve. And exactly as you said, when this program was at its height 100 years ago, then 10% of each young generation had the opportunity to participate in one of these programs. And as the participants came from all different layers of society, a majority were actually from farming or working class background. Those 10% was enough to create what we today would call a tipping point in society. And that is how we went from poor authoritarian states to liberal, rich democracies in just a few generations.
which is just fantastic. And I just love that there was no agenda. There wasn't a political agenda. It wasn't to teach them in a certain direction. It was simply to encourage to find your inner compass, your inner locus of control, with the knowledge that once enough people have done, we can emerge a greater heightened consciousness, and just the knowledge of the truth that when we're at that stage and the critical mass is there, we have this new transformation. And I know that you term it now a meta-modernism. This new world will emerge because we'll be, these are my words now, operating from a less of a self-centered viewpoint. If we find that inner compass, and enough of us are doing, we want for the greater whole. And when you were talking, the word emergence sprung to mind, where there's not this one authoritative leader, but we're all leading. So I want to ask you, Tomas,
yes,
where did it go wrong? Where did it go wrong?
So first of all, I should just stress what you said there, that these were very visionary leaders, and many of the leading people came from a social democratic background. But the interesting thing is that this was also supported very strongly from the liberal side. So whether we had a social democratic government or a liberal government, the idea that we wanted to have citizens that were mature enough to be able to decide for themselves around the future, that was a broad agreement on that agenda. And these centers were run by many different types of organizations. So there were, again, the workers' unions, but there were also the various church organizations, there were sports organizations, and there were the temperance movements that was important back then in Scandinavia that were running these centers. And they were very free to create their programs as long as they were following some general principles around the self-determination principle, that you should try to create people who are self-determined. And it was a bottom-up process, but of course the beauty here was that it was supported very strongly financially by a top-down, saying that yes, this is so important for society, not just for the individuals, but for society, that we put aside a substantial budget to be able to support these centers. But as long as you follow these very broad guidelines, please arrange these programs as you find best from your local perspectives. So that was amazing. So where did it go wrong? So first of all, I would say it didn't go wrong. It went very, very well. And we still see in Scandinavia, even as we point out in the book, Lena and I, that we are now starting to lose some of this in Scandinavia. We still build societies that in the foundation has a population that is not dependent on an external authority.
Yes.
We in times of crisis, and we can see that, for example, also in the way that we have handled, at least in Sweden, handled the COVID crisis. Giving responsibility to people rather than telling them exactly what to do, and fostering that sort of responsibility that makes at least a smaller percentage of the population in Scandinavia, I would say, ask for an external authority. We are not that prone to ask for an Erdogan or for a Trump or following a dogmatic religion or these things, because it is natural for us humans when we are in uncertain times. It's just so easy to want to have an external authority to hold on to. But we need to be strong there, because otherwise we will never change.
Yes, and I suppose
we won't have the emergence.
Yes, and I suppose it was a better question would have been, because it worked so well, why didn't it spread? And why aren't we in this, this global acceptance? Because when we're talking about it, what's wrong with that? It just makes perfect sense that would be the way forward.
So something did go wrong in Scandinavia. And that is that, and that is why this history is not well known even in Scandinavia, because these centers, many of them still exist, but most people today think that they were and they are today mainly used as adult educational centers. You can go there to learn a new language or to do pottery or things like that. But this focus on inner development, consciousness development, or even spiritual development, these leading intellectuals and politicians, they were actually talking about a secular spiritual development. Most of them, at least in Sweden, were not religious at all. They were very secular. Some of the leading persons were even atheists. But they believed very much in spiritual development, and they thought that this will have to find a secular format in modernity, and that this was part of that program. But this idea of consciousness development only resonates with you, and you can only understand that if you have a worldview like the German philosophers had, where consciousness actually evolves. If you lose that worldview, and that is what we did in Scandinavia, because after the Second World War, we stopped reading the German philosophers and we turned more to the Anglo-Saxon world. And there, of course, were still the Enlightenment philosophers, the leading philosophers. So then we went back to Locus' blank slate, Descartes, our mind as a machine, or even in economics, we started to believe in this concept of the rational homo economicus. And with that view of us humans, then of course, consciousness development doesn't make sense. So then we don't see that dimension, and we only see the educational dimension. But it's absolutely clear that what this was all about was the more broad consciousness development, because we have a quote that still resonates with many in Sweden, and many remembers this, that one of the leading actors in this, a woman called Ellen Key, she very famously said that this concept of Bildung, what we are doing at these centers, the Bildung part, Bildung is what remains with you once you have forgotten everything what you have learned. So it's not at all about the content of your mind. It's about the spaciousness and the ability of your mind to be able to handle more nuances and perspectives and an opening of your heart and those aspects. And again, so after the Second World War, we went back to this much more rationalistic Enlightenment view of our mind and our possibilities. And then, of course, this didn't any longer make so much sense.
Yes.
So, but it did spread. It did spread, and on the cover of the book, The Nordic Secret, we actually have this is Goethe and Schiller, but this, do you know who that is?
Yes, I do.
It's Rosa Parks.
Rosa Parks, yes.
It's Rosa Parks' mugshot. The black woman who refused to give up her seat on the bus in Alabama, and that was very important moment for the civil rights movement. And the reason we have her on the cover is that in the 1920s, there was this American guy called Miles Horton who went to Denmark for a year to learn about this concept. And then he went back to the US and he started 4 centers like this, called folk high schools. And the most important of those is the Highlander Folk School in Tennessee. And Rosa Parks has in many interviews said that the reason she had the courage and the moral insight or knowledge or understanding that even if the law of the land said that she had to give up her seat to that white guy in Alabama, she had the moral right to remain seated, was the fact that she had spent time at one of these programs. Wow. At the Highlander folk school. And many of the people within the civil rights movement participated in programs like this. And there is even a living memory around this today in the US. So I met quite a lot of educational scholars in the US who has been more familiar about the concept of the folk high schools in Scandinavia than many in Scandinavia are. And even Obama mentioned at a speech at a state dinner in Washington with 4 heads of states of Scandinavia, that he thought that if it hadn't been for this concept of the folk high schools and how this traveled to the US, the civil rights movement would not have been that successful. And he even said that I might not be standing here in front of you as the first Black American president if it hadn't been for this concept. And that might be an exaggeration, but at least it shows that this did not just have an impact in Scandinavia, but this focus on inner development to support societal change and transition is actually a valid way of looking at a theory of change of where we are right now in this chaotic time.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I know that you and I would agree that if now is a time where we could use getting back to that concept and implementing it and then encouraging people. But I'd love to ask you, do you think in this time of kind of turbulence and transition and change, do you think, I suppose you could go one of two ways. You want to be optimistic that the time is now, and therefore we're going to be able, more and more people are embracing getting back to this idea that we have to become self-determined, and let's help people, let's help people to emerge, let's help the new consciousness emerge. Or do you think that the signs of the times show that we're far away from kind of thinking that, I know that where you and I would stand, but what is the general feel that you know?
Yes. And I think we are in very paradoxical times, and it's not easy to read what is happening. But before answering that question, I just want to clarify that as much as I believe in the concept of retreats and working often out in nature, using nature as a catalyst, and many of these centers were beautifully located out in nature, and we have our retreat island, the Ekskär at the Oak Island. As much as I believe in that concept, it doesn't scale easily, because it is an expensive way of supporting consciousness development. And if you should scale this, then there wouldn't be enough. If we had 100 centers in each country, you would need thousands and so on. So that is why I view what happened in Scandinavia not as a blueprint of what we necessarily need to do right now, but more as a case study, or 3 case studies. I mean, this was implemented differently in the different countries, and you can really see these as 3 different cases. You can see this as a case study showing that when we speak today about the importance of supporting broad consciousness development, both for the benefit of the individuals, but also for the benefit of society, this is not just some crazy new age idea. This is actually something that has been tried on a large scale more than 100 years ago in 3 countries, And you can see the positive effects of that still on these countries. So more as a case study. And you mentioned before my initiative that my foundation, together with another foundation in Stockholm, the Norrsken Foundation, have been working on a few years, and that is the digital platform 29K. You can go to your app store and download the app to access the platform. And this is a non-commercial, it's a non-profit, it's an open source, co-created platform where we are trying to use the digital space to replicate these authentic meetings. So the main function or the core of this platform is the authentic video meetings between participants. And we are hoping that by making this non-profit and digital, that this could scale and potentially reach hundreds of thousands or even millions of people. It's a way of democratizing personal inner development to support this shift. Okay, but then to your question then. So where are we right now? And yeah, I think you are right that we are at a critical point in history. And some are talking about the fact that we are entering a phase shift. Some are talking about a bifurcation point where and if you use the language, I studied mathematics and physics at university, so I like this sort of complexity science language, that if you have a complex organic developing system, just like we realize now that our mind is such an organic system under development and can have phase shifts, can shift consciousness, the same way society is a complex organic system developing. And when you put developmental pressure on such a system, you can, for a very long time, you can stay on a linear curve and you can have incremental adaptations and make the system function better and better. But in many cases, these systems come to a point where the old way of functioning, the old way of organizing, your mind or meaning making, or your society, your institutions and your culture reach a limit. Yeah. And you come to this breaking point or bifurcation point, where the system either has to find a new way of organizing in a more complex, but perhaps also more elegant way of sorting itself out. Yeah. But if the system can't step up to that new level, then it might face a breakdown instead, in complexity, a fragmentation. Yes. So you come to a breakthrough or breakdown point. And I think that's where we are. Yes. Right now. And many things, I mean, not just the environmental problems that we are facing, but also the global political system is obviously facing problems. The market system cannot account for all these externalities. We have the psychological ill health crisis and obesity crisis, and you can just name them all. And sometimes education, we are talking about health, spiritual, religious, they're all breaking down. Yeah, and I don't think, and many with me don't think that these are actually individual crises, but that they are really just symptoms of an underlying, perhaps a meta crisis. Yeah. And I would say that if we're talking in that language, the reason we have reached this bifurcation point is that we have sort of exhausted the possibilities of modernity, the possibilities of the Enlightenment worldview and the industrial age, and that way of looking at and understanding ourselves and our relations and society and our relationship with nature. All of that has to be rethought again on such a deep level that we are almost we are probably even at a shift as deep as during the Enlightenment 300 years ago, when we went from a dogmatic religious worldview and medieval way of organizing society, and we went to a rationalistic scientific worldview and a modern way of organizing society. And of course, that worldview and that way of organization, we wouldn't want to be without that. because that is probably what humanity needed back then and still needs a lot of, because that way of thinking and acting and being has given us human rights, it's given us democracy, it's given us modern medicine, and all of those things that we wouldn't want to be without.
Yeah.
But I also think that it's becoming more and more clear that it might actually be this way of thinking and doing and being that is causing all these problems now.
Yes.
And if we are going to be able to step up, just like we did in Scandinavia when we went from a pre-modern to a modern society, now we need to step up from modernity and the postmodern critique of modernity, which is very useful. And we need to learn a lot from the postmodern critique. But the postmodern critique is exactly that. It's a critique.
Yeah.
It's not giving us the tools to move forward. So therefore, some thinkers and doers in this space are talking about that we need to move on from modernity and the postmodern critique of modernity into a meta-modernity. And that this will entail a shift up in society, but that has, for that to happen, to support that emergence, we need to help as many of us in this system to be able to relate to ourselves, to each other, to society, and to the planet in new and deeper ways. And that is what you could call supporting consciousness development, or you can give it other names. But basically, it's about starting to see ourselves in new lights.
Yes.
Starting to relate to other people in deeper and more meaningful ways, relating to society, realizing that society is not just something that happens to us, but that we can actually be co-creators of that society. Yes. And that's the story I tell in my latest book, The World We Create, really realizing that we are all, whether we are aware of it or not, co-creators of this world, and that we need to be that in a self-conscious way.
Yes.
So will we be waking up to this, or and manage the step up, or will we go through a breakthrough? And here's where we have the paradox today, because I have my main residence in London, and I certainly see that in London, and I hear this from the US and from many other places, also in Sweden and in Scandinavia, that with Brexit and with Trump and with the COVID pandemic, more and more people are acting out of fear. And that is fully understandable, because we see many of the societal systems breaking down. We even see the storming of the Capitol in the US. I mean, what is going on? How can I make sense of this? Can I make sense of this? And when we can't really make sense, and we see the systems around us breaking through, we get scared. And again, when we get scared, it's very natural for us to be looking for this sort of outside authority, to try to convince ourselves that we can take back control, or that we should put our trust in an Erdogan or a Trump or someone out there. So more and more people are actually acting from fear and from a lower consciousness level. But then at the same time, I can see an awakening. And that awakening is still very, very small, but it's growing rapidly. It's growing rapidly. And you've been in this space, and many of the people listening to this have been in this space for many, many years. I've been in this space for at least 10 years, and many of people listening here might have been for 10, 20, or 30 years. But up until, say, 5 years ago, or even 3 years ago, we were very marginal, and we were few between, and we even had difficulties in finding each other.
Yeah.
And when I say still 3 years ago, in my circles, and now we talk about my circles, we're talking about the need for a deep societal transformation, and the need, and that might start with an inner transformation, personal transformation. I very often, if not almost always, got the reply that don't be so worried. We have democracy and we have the market, and it is a bit of a bumpy road, but if we just give it time, the systems we have, like the market, like democracy, will sort the things out. That was 3 years ago. Now I don't hear that anymore.
Yeah.
Of course, this is not out in the street, but in our circles.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that, again, going to our listeners and viewers, that if not all, certainly a majority would agree that we cannot just sit back and rely on the fact that the market, in the present implementation of this socially constructed thing that we have created, that we call the market, or that the present implementation of democracy, and democracy is again a social construct, it's something that we have created, and it could look just like the market could look very different than democracy can and must look very different. The democracy in this sort of unholy alliance with corporate campaign contributions and the media landscape we have, and all of this. No, this will not be enough. We need to have a more deeper shift in the way that we organize society. So I think that most people listening would agree with that. And given the audience that you have, I think also most would agree that shift is not just a shift in the outside world.
Yes.
It's not just political decisions or reorganizing society in some clever way. That outer shift has to start with an inner shift.
Yes.
And it has to be an inner shift in a sufficiently large majority, or not majority, a sufficiently large portion of critical mass. And it can't just be an elite. It cannot just be the people listening to what we are talking about here. It has to be more people.
Yes.
And again, in Scandinavia, it was 10% that participated, 10% of each young generation. And I don't know if we're talking about that we need 5%, we need 10%, we need 15%, but certainly we need some sort of critical mass of people who has not just awakened cognitively, but also developed the inner capacities necessary to become conscious co-creators of this new society that we need to be midwives of. We can't plan it. It will be emergent. We can't manage it, but we can facilitate it, and we can try to be good midwives of this new society.
That's a really good analogy, actually. No matter how much you plan your birth plan, you've just got to be ready to accept what comes with grace and compassion and being present in the moment, and rising above yourself to give birth to something new. So here's the question.
But it's good if you are prepared. It's good if you are prepared. So as I see, what we are doing now is preparing ourselves, both cognitively and emotionally.
And learning from the past mistakes and evolving up. The medicine's better, and we've got this. And if this happens, you're not going to die now because we've learned from the past. Absolutely. So let's get practical. So it sounds from what you're saying, we're at this point in time where we're either going to break through or we're going to break down. In order to break through, we know that there's a tried and tested model out there, which is personal transformation first, create critical mass in that, and then together we emerge into the new whatever that is, because we're not there yet. And I love your 29k.org is a modern way of facilitating a mass change in the way that we would have in those retreat centers when that was more feasible. So apart from jumping
because I must just add to that, so you don't get the wrong impression from 29k and where we are. So for many people out now, the first step on their own personal development is healing and feeling safe. So there is where you need to start, and you need to help people to heal. You need to help people to heal personal traumas, but also we need to collectively address and heal collective traumas. And then we can, from a safe base, we can start and daring exploring new dimensions of our personal potential. So 29K is at this stage not some sort of magical consciousness rocket. No. It's very much practical, helping people to heal, connect to themselves, start to dare exploring new ways of thinking and seeing themselves and all of that. Yeah, I just wanted to inject that.
You're such a good futurist that you answered my question that was coming by interrupting the question, which was perfect, because the question was, apart from things like 29K, which is a way of us coming together, what can we do? Where's the first step? And you've just given it to us. So the first step that we need to action, and that we can action now, immediately, or tomorrow, like now, is to start with the healing in order to feel safe. And whatever that means for people. So starting, just posing that out there is an invitation and an opportunity, and with the knowledge that we know that we have to come from a grounded, safe state, and that's a good place to
and we need, of course, in this healing and in this development, we need to start with ourselves.
Yes,
we need to start with ourselves, but we shouldn't. And this journey will be beneficial for ourselves and for our children, because when we live in these times of uncertainty and we don't even know, for example, for our children, what practical skills you should learn to be able to just function in the world in 20 years. Some now say that we should all learn to program. That is one thing I'm sure that programming within 5 years' time be done by artificial intelligence. We will not need programmers in 5 years. So what do we need? Well, irrespective of where the world will be in 10 years' time, we will need people who has developed the inner capacities, both emotional and cognitive, to be able to live in a rapidly changing world. Yeah. And that is working on your capacity for empathy and compassion.
Yes.
It's taking more perspectives of the world, being open to change, being open to new perspectives. Again, connecting with your inner compass and starting to become self-authoring. Yeah. So if you are working on all of those things, those will be essential for your own well-being and for your own ability to function in the world in 10 or 20 years. But we shouldn't stop there. We should also realize that this is completely necessary for society, that we actually have a lot of people who are developing these capacities. So we start with ourselves, but we don't do this only for ourselves. Yeah. We do this for the possibilities of increasing the odds for a positive societal transition. Yeah. So we shouldn't forget about the collective aspect of what we are doing. And quite a lot of people in this consciousness space are too much focused just on their individual journeys, or the journeys of themselves and their community and their friends. But here really we need to find ways to include as many people as possible on this journey.
I believe that once you start to transform yourself and find that place of your inner compass, it's natural to want to bring people on the journey and to help, because that's a natural state of being, right? It's not about me, it's about us. And I believe once we get past that fear and into a state of safety and happiness and contentness within oneself, knowing what we're all about, then we do that naturally. You've just reminded
we do. But for those who are new into this space, it helps if we include this in our story.
Yes.
When we are creating these programs, when we are meeting people at the retreats, things like, if those who are new to this journey and perhaps not yet feeling the necessity of this, then we can at least include that in our story, in our framing of what we are doing.
Yes, and I love that you've brought in story. We need another hour, Tomas. We might have to do a part 2, because stories is so important, right? The narrative that we tell ourselves. And I know that you talk about the need for, out of this, the crisis, we need to get to a point where a meta narrative will emerge and we'll have a new story. You've also reminded me,
or new stories.
Yeah.
Because we hopefully we are, or to support this emergence, I mean, you need some sort of cohesion for emergence to happen. But if you have too much cohesion, then emergence will not happen. So we need to have many stories and many perspectives and many different angles. And again, that was the beauty again of the Nordic Secret, that was done from so many angles. It wasn't some sort of state-controlled indoctrination program. And I believe that is the approach we need to take today, that the old stories that we have, and certainly the main cultural story that we are telling ourselves in the West of progress and GDP growth and keeping the wheels of the market going and all of that story, or those stories, need to be replaced with many new stories. But perhaps all those new stories will have some elements in common, like the hope and the possibility of this positive breakthrough.
Yeah. You've reminded me that the title of my TED Talk ended up being, if we teach our children their true being, we can change the world. So it's quite apt here.
Absolutely.
I didn't express it at all in any way to the standard where you've expressed everything today, but the message is there. And I think it's not only about within our narratives of personal and then community and communal, but also I love that in your case studies, it's taken 3 generations only. 3 generations. So if we can make a shift, if we can make a critical mass in 1 generation, and the speed of things is speeding up too. So who knows? It might not take 3. It could be quicker.
It might need to be. It might need to be quicker because of all these crises that we have. The environmental crisis might not give us 3 generations.
Yes.
But we should remember, and I want to end with a quote of my African philosopher friend Bayo Akomolafe, because we should remember, and now we're talking about a lot about theories of change and what we need to do and so on, but we should remember that we are in this emergent process and that we can't really plan and manage this. We should more look at ourselves as guardians or midwives that are much, much better metaphors of what is going on and what our role as humans might be at this point in history. But Bayo Akomolafe, he has this wonderful quote. He says that, "My ancestors tell me we are in an emergency. We have to slow down." And I think that is beautiful. And that contains a lot of insight. And that is also pointing to your title there, that it might be in our being and not in our doing.
Yes.
So we might need to ask ourselves, not what should we do at this point in history, but who should we be?
Yes. Tomas, we're leaving it there. We can't get better.
Thank you.
I thank you so much for your time. I know you're an extremely busy man. You do so much good. I'm coming to your retreat center when they let me out of Australia after all this silliness has passed.
You are so welcome.
Thank you so much for giving us your wisdom and your time today. And we will chat in the near distant future. You take care. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.